Om Tavagatamritam Taptajivanam Kaviviriditam Kalmashapaham Sharamana Mangalam Srimadatam Bhuvivaranti Bhurirajana. Om, your words are like nectar, bringing life to scorched souls. They are praised by poets and remove all sin. They are auspicious to hear, wonderful and exalted. Those who spread these words throughout the world are truly giving souls. Welcome everyone to our class on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. For those of you who are following along in the book, we are on page 103, but it's the chapter beginning on page 99, the visit to Vidya Sagar. Just to remind everyone, Vidya Sagar was well known to M because M was a teacher in his school, and Sri Ramakrishna was anxious to meet Vidya Sagar because he was very well known at that time. He was a great philanthropist and scholar, Sanskrit scholar, Bengali scholar, was a great reformist, and was known to be a very compassionate person, was very much interested in social questions of the day, the remarriage of widows and marriageable age and different things like that. So we've been observing, we've been sitting in, you could say, on this conversation. Vidya Sagar had invited Sri Ramakrishna along with them to come to his house, and it was very standard for him to have some time where he would sit in his drawing room, and people would come to him, mostly petitioners. It would be people who are seeking a little scholarship for a child to study, or someone who didn't have enough money, they had a loan that they had to repay, or any social questions or anything. So people are always coming to him and seeking his help, generally financial help and other types of help. So by the time Sri Ramakrishna has come and met him and sitting with him, the room is pretty much filled with people, because all of the local neighborhood people knew about Sri Ramakrishna, and everyone was curious to meet him. At that time, he was known mostly to the members of the Brahmo Samaj, and others, very close householder disciples. The monastic disciples had started coming about a year before this, first with Rakal and Narendra and some others. We're talking about April 5th, 1882. So it's only a couple of months after M came for the very first time to meet Sri Ramakrishna, and M himself was very close to the Brahmo Samaj. I don't know if he was exactly a member and had actually signed all the forms not to go to the temple, but he had family relations and knew Keshav very well. So there's a circle. There was a circle among the intelligentsia. These are very important people in Kolkata at that time, and Vidya Sagar was one of the very important people. There were interesting connections when Narendra was searching for a job, and after his father had died, this was the first job he was able to get. He was also a teacher at Vidya Sagar school. That didn't go very well. He didn't keep that job. There were some false rumors started about him, and I mentioned last time that even M, he had a little falling out with Vidya Sagar. One year the students did not do so well with the grades. They're always ranking them in India, how many students finish first, or second, or third, or something. And his students didn't do that well. This was the year that Sri Ramakrishna was very ill in Kashipur, and M was spending all of his spare time there. And Vidya Sagar kind of accused him that he wasn't paying enough attention to his work with the students. That's why they didn't so well, because he was visiting Sri Ramakrishna so often. And M said, enough. So he immediately quit. He couldn't bear any criticism of Sri Ramakrishna or anything like that. But at this time, Vidya Sagar and him were on very good, close terms. Vidya Sagar looked upon him almost as a son, you can say. The discussion has been about, it actually goes to the question. This is the end of what we read last week. Devati, suppose a man has obtained the knowledge of Brahman in Samadhi, does he speak anymore? So Sri Ramakrishna, this is an introduction to his teachings on what he calls the state of Vijnana. The state of Vijnana is the state of mind and being of the person who has realized the highest truth, more or less we can say in Samadhi. This was the common way that we understand it, and has come down after that. What is the condition? We can say this Vijnani is more or less like the Jivan Mukta. We have this concept in Vedanta that there are two different types of mukti. Mukti means freedom, liberation. That one is Jivan Mukti, while the body is still living, and the other is Videha, when we give up the body and have that final liberation, there's no more rebirth. So the state of the Vijnani and the state of the Jivan Mukta are more or less the same. But there will be so many very interesting things about this state of Vijnana that Sri Ramakrishna talks about. In some sense, it's original to him, not 100%, of course, but it was his own experience. So it's different. It's not a philosophical speculation. What is the knower Brahman like after he comes back from Samadhi? Because Sri Ramakrishna had that experience. But he'll point to Shankaracharya and he'll say he retained the ego of knowledge. He goes on like that. We read that last time. And then he was talking about how this state of silence will come as we get closer and closer to God realization. The mind, we get more and more withdrawn. In that state of Samadhi, of course, no talk of speaking at all. Coming down from that, then no need to speak, no harm also. No harm. So he gives different examples. The bee buzzes as long as it is not sitting on a flower. It becomes silent when it begins to sip the honey. But sometimes, intoxicated with the honey, it buzzes again. So in that state of divine realization and one feeling of oneness with God, when the mind is not in Samadhi, one may speak. There's no harm. It doesn't prove that one hasn't realized the highest, or one may remain withdrawn. I mentioned last time that Thakur, as much as we hear him speaking, this was later, after that initial period, that 6-month period of Samadhi. We hear from Hridoy mostly, and those who were with him at that time, that he hardly spoke at all. Of course, there weren't throngs of people coming to him, but that was the nature of his mind. So he knew very well, tendency might be to not speak at all, and yet, out of the fullness of that realization, that it might be very natural when those who come to him, who can appreciate his words, that he'll speak to them. So this is where we're starting now. The Rishis of old attained the knowledge, or maybe before that. An empty pitcher makes a gurgling sound when it is dipped in water. When it fills up, it becomes silent. All laugh. But if the water is poured from it into another pitcher, so in order to give these spiritual teachings and explain these realizations to others, then you will hear the sound again, laughter. The Rishis of old attain the knowledge of Brahman. Now, Sri Ramakrishna is always talking about the Rishis of old. Generally, if we try to understand what he means, why does he say the Rishis of old? This will be mostly what they call this Shantabhava, the calm attitude. And this will be more or less the path of knowledge, where they're trying to realize the infinite absolute Brahman. So this will be the Upanishadic seers, we can say. And he's not always very complimentary. Sometimes he'll say that they were a bit timid, that they were afraid to mix with other people, that somehow the mind will get polluted or tainted, so they would leave early morning and they wouldn't look at anybody. They come down with their head down. He liked a bolder type of attitude. So we'll see that also many times, that he'll compare the other type of Vijnani, not the Rishi of old, the Vijnani, who can live in the world and mix with people and everything. He'll compare them to the Vijnani, to the Rishis of old. He'll use that expression in a less than favorable way. One cannot have this. So the Rishis of old attained the knowledge of Brahman. So this will be non-dual. This would be the Advaitic experience. One cannot have this so long as there's the slightest trace of worldliness. Now, we're going to see that Sri Ramakrishna, his attitude was very much in sync with what we read in Gita. And I'll just take a second that if we look overall at the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna, we find two things. One, that if we compare what we read in the Upanishads, we find that, at least for me, his understanding of the relationship between Brahman and the universe is more closely aligned to the Upanishadic worldview than the Advaitic doctrine of Shankaracharya, which doesn't give so much objective reality, we may say maybe no objective reality, to this phenomenal universe. So that when, say in Taittiriya Upanishad, we have a very nice and highly allegorical rendering of this, where Brahman is sitting quietly and looks around and doesn't see anything, and we get the implication that he's bored, and it would be nice to have some playmates or something to see, something like that. So he says, Bahusyam, may I be many. Now, what happens after that is that from this thought, is kalpana, we can say from this thought, the elements start to come into creation. These elements, there's akasha and agni, the space and air and fire and water, all of these one by one, and they'll combine and mix with each other, so that even though it's a projection out of, we can say, cosmic mind if we want, even though it's a projection out of the mind, it takes on some independent objective type of reality, at least in this Upanishadic worldview. This is not to say that Shankaracharya's interpretation is not very beautiful and logical in some sense, but it doesn't align exactly with what we find in the Upanishads. Whereas for Sri Ramakrishna, we have this idea that, yes, we start out with this infinite absolute Brahman, but this Shakti is what is responsible for the projection of the universe. This generally, this is Chit Shakti. Chit Shakti means the power of consciousness, the power of thought. Now, curiously, because we always hear how the doctrine of creation in Vedanta and the doctrine of creation in Judeo-Christian Islamic thought, how very different they are. That there's no idea of creation out of nothing in Vedanta, things like that. But actually, if we think about it, when we hear that God thought, let there be many. God thought, let there be light. Okay, this would be the first thing. Let there be light. Each day he had a different thought. And that thought itself was the creation. It wasn't that he had that thought and then he created it. The thought itself was the creation. So this is a Satya Kalpa, the very idea of it is the reality of it, the creation of it. So we have some type of idea like that. So with these ancient rishis, it won't be so much this world is unreal or anything like that, but their idea was to realize the infinite absolute Brahman. Now, so from this point of view, the Sri Ramakrishna is to me, embodies these teachings of the Upanishads, where this creation is of course traced back to Brahman itself, but has some type of objective reality. It is not a type of pure illusion, because Sri Ramakrishna didn't like that idea very much. The swapnavat, the world is unreal like a dream. But the Upanishads do not represent the whole of Vedanta as we understand Vedanta, because we have this idea of there are three different pillars. There's Prasthanatraya, three different pillars of Vedanta, which will include not only the Upanishads, but Gita and Brahma Sutra. And in Gita, we have so many things that we don't find in the Upanishads. And one of these, of course, is the avatar. Another is Bhakti, Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga. Swamiji makes the point that we find the germ of them in the Upanishads, but these are developed later. And the whole idea of Bhagavan, personal God. These are all ideas that were spun out of the Upanishads, but aren't found explicitly in the Upanishads. Now, it doesn't mean that one contradicts the other. Swamiji used to say that, like other types of truths, spiritual truths are also eternal but discovered in time. So it's not that before Gita there was no such thing as the avatar. Either there was or there wasn't. And whether we come to that conclusion that there was at a certain period of time, just as with gravity or any other law of nature, an apple fell at precisely the same speed of acceleration. Not speed of acceleration, something. Before the apple fell on Einstein, on Newton's head. Huh? Isaac Newton? Was it him? No. Not Einstein. We're talking about gravity. Yeah. So these are two different things. The reason I'm going into all of this is that when we get to Gita, I would say that Sri Ramakrishna is the perfect embodiment of the teachings of Gita. Perfect embodiment. I've mentioned many times our Swami Parameshanandaji. Paramesh Maharaj, the disciple of a Holy Mother, he had a very original way of stating things. One time he was talking to some of the young monks, and he said, you know, there's a very wonderful Bengali translation. He didn't say commentary, translation of Gita. And they said, oh, what is it? And he said, Kotamrito, the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. That it's because really Sri Ramakrishna embodied so many ideas. Now, why am I saying all of this? Because one of the main teachings of Gita is that there's a path of knowledge that is difficult. Now, it doesn't dismiss it, because in Gita it gives equal importance to all of the different spiritual paths, or Bhakti Yoga, or Karma Yoga, or Raja Yoga, and Gyana Yoga. Specifically chapter 12, Bhakti Yoga, this is a very important chapter. All of our summer camp kids were learning this and memorizing it and everything. It's a very important chapter, and it begins with this idea that the path of knowledge requires a tremendous amount of dispassion. And the way it puts it is that those people who are, it says dehavat. Dehavat. It either means that anybody with a body, which means everybody, for them is difficult, but specifically for those identified with the body. This path of knowledge is difficult. So the path of knowledge requires, from the very beginning, the tremendous amount of dispassion, non-attachment, desirelessness, purity of heart, purity of mind, so many different things that in this Kali Yuga, Sri Ramakrishna stresses. That's not specifically said in Gita, but in this Kali Yuga, that we find that these types of individuals are very rare. So, he says, one cannot have this, that is the knowledge of Brahman, so long as there is the slightest trace of worldliness. Now, this may be true in all spiritual paths, but in the path of knowledge, this worldliness should be almost eliminated even before we start. All of the other paths, all we need is some sincere desire, path of devotion especially, some sincere desire, and then the purification takes place as we go along. Karma Yoga, as we go along, it takes place. This is why for Shankaracharya and many others. They say Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, these have to take place first to purify the heart, then we become prepared for Jnana Yoga. So he says, how hard the Rishis labored. Early in the morning they would go away from the hermitage and would spend the whole day in solitude meditating on Brahman. At night they would return to the hermitage and eat a little fruit or roots. They kept their minds aloof from the objects of sight, hearing, touch, and other things of worldly nature. Only thus did they realize Brahman as their own inner consciousness. Now, he's giving this example to show the greatness of the Rishis of old, but also how for many people nowadays it's a little bit impractical. So he goes on, but in the Kali Yuga, and this is a theme that runs through the Gita, in the Kali Yuga, he uses this phrase, Annagata Prana. Annagata Prana. And I wish, again, I could remember the verse, but there's a theory that in each of the 4 yugas, there's a different ex-gata prana. And I don't remember what they are. That maybe in one yuga, it's Vidya gata prana, one yajna gata, something like that. But this Kali Yuga is the one in which there's the least natural spirituality, the highest degree of body consciousness. The theory, of course, we don't know exactly, but we can say, at least in this present age, we can agree with that. And greatest desire for enjoyment and pleasure and everything. So he says that the life is wholly given to, anna means food, but it means materialism, we can say. So in the Kali Yuga, man being totally dependent on food for life, anna gata prana. So body consciousness, desire for enjoyment, all of these things are included in that. Cannot altogether shake off the idea that he is a body. In this state of mind, it is not proper for him to say, I am he. Now, what's wrong with saying, I am he? It's a beautiful statement. What's wrong is that we have to ask ourselves, what is in my mind? What is my understanding of I? And what is my understanding of he? Is my understanding of I is me. So I'm talking about Swami Atmajnanananda. You know, that very nice young monk. That very nice young monk. I used to be able to say things like that. You know, who lives at the Vedanta Center and very handy, can do some outside work, this and that. That person, yeah. That I am that infinite absolute Brahman. What is this infinite absolute Brahman? Creator of the whole universe. Now, what am I saying? That this small individual is identifying himself with the creator of the universe. So it's a ridiculous statement. Absolutely ridiculous. We have to have some very clear understanding that when we say I, we mean the real self. And when we say Brahman, we don't even mean Saguna Brahman. We don't even mean Brahman as the source of the whole universe. We're talking about Brahman as pure existence, pure consciousness, pure bliss. Then we can have some slight adhikara, some slight right to make that statement, I am he. And it doesn't mean that somebody can say, oh, then is it true that I am not one with the Brahman? No, of course it's true. We're talking about practical now. From a practical point of view, what is a good spiritual attitude to take? So Sri Ramakrishna is telling us, in this state of mind, that means if we have that state of mind where we have this identification with the body and filled with desires and identification with the ego and like sense pleasure, enjoyment and everything, then it is not proper to say, I am he. When a man does all sorts of worldly things, he should not say, I am Brahman. A very practical idea. And as I say, exactly what we find in this chapter 12 of Gita. Those who cannot give up attachment to worldly things and who find no means to shake off the feeling of I should rather cherish the idea, I am God's servant, I am his devotee. One can also realize God by following the path of devotion. So Sri Ramakrishna used to say, if this I won't go, he would say, Tobe takshala, then let that rascal remain, but as the servant of God. So this is, again, how practical Sri Ramakrishna is. This ego, which is considered the main obstacle to God realization, the main obstacle. This is the stump that grows outside of the house, which doesn't let us open the door. The main obstacle, he's saying, it's also the main help. This is the great advantage of Bhakti Yoga. That which is an obstacle on the path of knowledge becomes an aid. How do we do it? We transform it. We do it gradually. If we have a fruit that's green, unripe fruit, we don't expect it to get to fully ripened in a day. It takes a little time. We take the tomatoes and we put them in a brown paper bag. And after a while, after a few days, we look and we say, oh, look at that. It's not green anymore. It's still hard. And then after a while, we say, oh, it's starting to ripen. Then one day we look and say, it's perfectly ripened. So it takes time. So the Bhakti Yoga allows for the transformation of the I, our sense of I, whereas Gyana Yoga almost insists that, at least from an understanding point of view, our sense of I is a very pure sense of I at the very beginning. We have to stand on the truth. I am the self, the very beginning. Only if I know I am the self, I am the Atman, can I possibly be one with the Brahman. Well, Atman and Brahman, of course, are not different, but our conception is a little different at the very beginning. So, Thakur will recommend any of the spiritual attitudes. He seemed to have a preference for two in particular. One will be this dasya bhava, the attitude of the servant, and his own personal favorite will be what he calls as santana bhava, shantana bhava, the attitude of the child towards the mother, not one of the 5 standard Vaishnava bhavas that we know about. But these 5 are not absolute. There's no reason why there can't be 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different, any of the relationships that we have. We don't have any of them called looking upon God as Father. That doesn't mean it's not a very beautiful relationship. It just means that for some reason, because of the Puranic ideas and the life of Krishna and everything, we end up with those 5 particular ones. One can also realize God by following the path of devotion. So it becomes clear he's not saying that one cannot realize God through the path of knowledge. We'll see that Sri Ramakrishna liked this idea of having this understanding of Gyana Yoga, but utilizing the tools of Bhakti Yoga and understanding that they mesh, they don't contradict each other. Let this, when he says, keep the knowledge of Advaita tied in the quarter of your cloth and then do whatever you want, it really means that let it be the ground upon which this dualistic relationship is superimposed. How do we do that? Because we know that this ego, this I, is not ultimately real. There's no substance to it. It's an appearance. But it doesn't leave us. This is exactly what we mean by Maya. It is no ultimate reality, but we can't get rid of it. It's unreal, but we can't say non-existent. So this ego is like that. It's constantly changing. It's constantly causing problems. It's constantly causing division. It's because of this ego that we feel separate from ourselves and others, ourselves and God. It's a great separator. And it's also the veil. This is the ultimate idea of Maya. There's the ego. Ego itself is Maya. Thakur will give different examples. Sometimes he'll say time itself is Maya, ignorance is Maya, but very often he'll say ego itself is Maya. The Jnani gives up his identification with worldly things. So we always get this distinction, path of knowledge and path of devotion, Gyana Marga and Bhakti Marga. Thakur would like to see these distinctions disappear a little bit, but they're important distinctions in the beginning, especially if we try to decide what path we ourselves should follow. We have these guidelines, we have these tests. Do I have this body consciousness or not? So the Jnani gives up his identification with worldly things at the very beginning, discriminating, not this, not this. This is the path of neti, neti. Now, what does it mean, not this, not this? We can say that we'll start out with some guidelines to decide what will fall in one category, which we call Sat, and another category, which we call Asat. And some people will say that, okay, let's start out with the external things, that if it's changing, it has to be Asat. If it's eternal, it has to be Sat. We can do that with this external universe. To me, it makes more sense and is more helpful, for me at least, to not think about this external universe, to think about the self. And then the category will be more seer and seen. That the real will be the one which is observing, and the unreal, asat, will be that which is observable. So this will be the discrimination between the self and the different sheaths. So if I can observe this body, I'm not this body, that means the body falls under the category of asat. And the same thing with the senses and with the mind and the intellect and the subconscious mind and all of that. So we peel them away. And Thakur, please don't get this false idea that he has anything against the path of knowledge. He's constantly giving ideas and teachings according to Gyana Yoga. So this very beautiful one of peeling the skins of the onion. We peel off one after another. The hard outer one, dark one is the body, and then each one gets a little bit more translucent until we get to the very last one. We peel that off, and there's nothing left. Infinite absolute reality is left. So this is how we can practice this neti. Not so much that, this table isn't Brahman, this chair isn't Brahman. That doesn't get us too far. But if we analyze the nature of the self, and we say, no, I'm not the mind, because I am observing the mind, and the mind is constantly changing. And I thought one way last year, and I think a different way this year, and it's not even my source of self-existence. I know I exist in that way. We peel them off one by one, and we end up with this Atmajnana, with the real knowledge of the self. So we're left with a situation where, what have we done? We said, okay, well, the body is asat, it's something unreal. And we're left with this dualism, where we have two categories, that one is real and one is unreal. We're trying to get beyond dualism, and here we've created a dualism. What is real and what is unreal? So Sri Ramakrishna will say that this is a practice that we do to let us get inside of that onion, to let us get to the heart of things till we know the real nature of the self. It's not really meant to say that, the body, mind, senses, everything are unreal. They're not Brahman. They're not the self. They're not the witness. They're nothing to be identified with. This is the main point of it. So he says, the Gyani gives up his identification with worldly things, discriminating not this, only then can he realize Brahman. It is like reaching the roof of a house by leaving the steps behind one by one. So we climb up one step. If we want to go higher, we have to leave the other behind. We get to that step and we ask ourselves, have we reached the roof? No, we haven't, so we have to go further. We leave it behind. We don't have to say too much about it. We can say, enough is to say, well, I know it's not the roof. I have to go higher. Is it real? Is it unreal? We don't have to bother. We keep going higher and higher and higher. But the Vijnani, who is more intimately acquainted with Brahman, realizes something more. Now this Vijnani is the one who gets to the roof and comes back down. Now, you may have seen some optical illusions and things where if you're looking up steps, it looks like one thing, but if you're at the top and looking back down, it looks a little different. I don't know if you've ever seen anything like that, but this is a perfect example that our understanding, it's the same steps when we come back down, but looking at it from the top, facing down, we get a completely different view. We say, well, it's not what I thought it was when I was looking up. As we're climbing up, we have an understanding of what it is. It's all unreal. It's all false. It's not the self. But after coming down again from the roof, then we say, I discarded it before. Now I see what I discarded. I couldn't have gotten to the roof without it. Huh? It couldn't have been completely unreal. That's what enabled me to get to the roof. So he sees that what he discarded as not this, as asat, as unreal, is nothing but the manifestation. Because, does he say it here? Yeah, I'll get to that. It is like reaching the roof of a house by leaving the steps behind one by one, but the Vijnani, who is more intimately acquainted with Brahman, realizes something more. Now we'll get to this Shakti vision of the world, where Brahman is endowed with this tremendous power. They call this Shakti. The same materials as the roof. What is the roof made of? You know, in India, almost everything is made of bricks. It's very interesting. I spent 1 year living in a ground floor, a couple of small rooms in a small house in an area of Kolkata called the Koshba. And the first night I was there, I realized it was right on a curve, and everyone that went around that curve, every bus, every car, there weren't that many cars in those days, maybe a taxi, but a bus, would lean on the horn going around the curve because they couldn't see who was the other side. And I thought, oh my God, well, I'm going to live with this for a full year. Because my room was right on the road. There was maybe 5 feet or something like that. But fortunately, almost the very next day, it turned out that they started making a paved road. There was no paved road there. But how did they make a paved road? I was so curious to watch. One person, they would take truckloads of brick, and they'd make a big pile of the brick. And one person would sit on the big pile of bricks and would take one brick and would have a little umbrella over the head to protect it, and take a hammer and keep pounding on this brick till this brick turned into brick dust, into little pieces of brick. And this went on for a full year. And we're talking about just a couple of miles of road until it reached the point where it could really be crushed and form the basis for a paved road. So the road is really made of the same stuff. Huh? So this is Thakur saying that the steps that take us to the roof, they'll be made of brick. And there'll be a little lime that's added to it in brick dust. They'll crush it a little bit, and they'll to make a little mortar out of it. And this is how they'll form the steps. You get to the roof, exactly the same. The same brick dust, lime, mortar, all of those things, exactly the same. Here we're expecting it to be something completely different. So Thakur is saying that after that we have this realization, the same Brahman is manifesting as this visible universe. So he says, anyhow, what a blessing it was for me. It was quiet the whole time. And but I kept looking out. I think it was even a woman carrying all the bricks and everything, and somebody just with a hammer. I thought it's probably not the most efficient way to make a road, but anyhow, it saved me because it was quiet. They didn't have any cars, no cars or trucks or buses could pass for that full year that I was there. He realized that the steps are made of the same materials as the roof, bricks, lime, and brick dust. That which is realized intuitively as Brahman through the eliminating process of not this, is then found to have become the universe and all its living beings. The Vijnani sees that the reality which is Nirguna without attributes is also Saguna with attributes. Now, there are two ways of understanding these attributes. One is this idea of Shakti, that there's a power associated with the Brahman, that Chit Shakti, this will be, we can understand this as Saguna. But the other is that this whole universe is like the body of Brahman. So in that sense, that this universe is also a quality, is also an attribute, we can say, of a Brahman. Not to be identified with the Brahman, but nothing distinct from it, nothing that can be separated from it, nothing that can't be traced back to it. There is no separate prakriti in Vedanta that exists separate from Purusha. We use these terms and everything, but ultimately we have to understand that what we call prakriti is something that either inheres in Brahman or can be looked at as Maya, as a type of deluding force or the ignorance within, something like that, but not something completely separate. So the Vijnani sees that the reality which is Nirguna, without attributes, is also Saguna, with attributes. So this is a very important teaching of Sri Ramakrishna. We'll get it over and over again, that this Shakti, this divine power, cannot have any existence unless it's inhering, unless it exists within some substance. It's a very commonsensical type of idea. We can have any object that doesn't have some visible shape and form and color to it. And we can't have any color that is not the attribute of an object. We can't see redness. We can only see a red object. We can't see an object that has no color. If we say it has no color, what do we mean? Maybe we mean that it's white, or that it hasn't been dyed yet, but that's also a color. It has to have some color. So there can't be attribute without substance and substance without the attribute. It's a very basic type of thing. Now, does this mean when the Gyani says that Nirguna Brahman is the ultimate absolute reality? No, that's also true, because the Shakti that belongs to Brahman is not always active. If it's not always active, that means it doesn't have that same absolute ultimate reality. If something is real, it has to be permanent and eternal and unchanging. So we have so many different examples. Swami Swahanandaji always gave the example of the woman and the mother. It's a very nice type of example. The motherhood of the woman, which means the potential for having a child, the potential for giving birth, that motherhood exists within the woman. So we have this womanhood, which is always there, and the motherhood, which is potential. When the child is born, then the woman becomes a mother, but she doesn't cease to be a woman. So this is his point. Saguna Brahman and Nirguna Brahman are not two different things. The womanhood, the Shakti, is what we call in Vedanta Ishvara. So sometimes we have the very false, wrong idea that we have two things. There's the Brahman and then there's Ishvara. And maybe a third thing, Bhagavan, personal God. That Sri Ramakrishna is constantly telling us, no, these are all one and the same reality. Only this divine power is sometimes manifest, sometimes unmanifest. But the womanhood is always there. The Nirguna aspect of Brahman is always there. Even when the Saguna is there, even I as an individual, I have certain qualities. Those qualities are secondary and yet indispensable. They can exist without me, but they don't have to be there. So in that sense, they don't rise to the same level as Nirguna Brahman, but unless we take it into consideration, we're shortchanging ourselves. We're not getting the full weight. So Thakur will emphasize this point over and over and over again. So the Vijnani sees that the reality which is Nirguna, without attributes, is also Saguna, with attributes. So again, these attributes can be this in terms of Shakti, or it can even be in terms of the manifestation of Brahman. Now, when we talk about the relationship between the Jivatman and Brahman, and the relationship between Jagat and Brahman, again, we shouldn't get confused. They're two different things. We're not identifying this universe, visible universe, with Brahman. Brahman can manifest as the universe, can appear as this universe, but is something beyond this universe. Brahman does not manifest as the Jivatman. Brahman is the Jivatman. It's a very important distinction. If we think of the dream universe, the dream world is a projection out of the consciousness of the sleeper. It's not identified with the sleeper, but it can exist without the consciousness of the sleeper. Whereas the actor in the dream, the awareness, the person who's really experiencing the dream as the actor, is the same one who's experiencing the dream as the dreamer. There's perfect identity, perfect oneness. Not even that one has to realize or merge in the other. There's only one. I wake up and I use the same I. I dreamt that I did this, same I. But we realize that the dream came out of consciousness, projected out of consciousness. Not exactly identified with consciousness. We don't think the objects in the dream are aware of anything. Whereas the jiva in the dream is aware. It is conscious. So it's a little bit different, but what Thakur is saying that these attributes, we can look at it either way. We can look at it as these divine qualities that belong to Ishvara, or this whole Virat, this whole visible universe, is as if the body of God. A man cannot live on the roof a long time. That means remain in Nirvikalpa Samadhi. A long time, he comes down again. Those who realize Brahman in Samadhi come down also and find that it is Brahman that has become the universe and its living beings. Okay, now, this is another very, very tricky point. I spoke about it earlier. It'll come back again and again. Thakur is speaking in very, very highly general terms here. Very often he will speak in very specific terms about who can even come down from that state. Can everybody realize that state? Can everybody stay there for a long time? How long can they stay? Can everybody come back down from that? Does one give up the body in 21 days? These are all very interesting questions, and people can have even different, come to different conclusions about what it really means with all of this. But here he's speaking in very, very general terms. Those who realize Brahman in Samadhi come down also. So we don't have to decide here and now. Does he mean only the Vijnani? Does he mean only the Ishvara Koti? Does he mean only the avatar? Only these Adhikarika Purusi, the very special people with a certain mission in life? Or is he saying that anyone can have that realization and come back down from it? We'll see that sometimes he indicates one way, sometimes the other way a little bit. I have my own personal theory that there's a gray area between the Ishvara Koti and Jiva Koti. That there's gradation there. And it's not, my theory means that I'm basing it on Thakur's, some of his other teachings. And one of his other teachings revolves around a concept which he calls Adhar. Adhar means a receptacle. And he uses this expression to explain what spiritual qualities, what spiritual attainments, what spiritual powers can a person hold? How much devotion can there be? That those who are choto adhar, he said someone who is a small container, they can also have God realization. There's no problem with that. They can have God realization, but can they withstand the surge of the highest types of spiritual emotions? Thakur, he talks about the elephant that goes into a small bamboo hut, or jumping into a pool, a very small pool of water. All the water will go out. If it's a big lake, the water will hardly be disturbed. Now, from this, we can also say that there's every possible gradation. That there'll be some who are like medium-sized adhar. He always talked about Swamiji, Narendra, of course, as a huge receptacle. He gave so many different examples of that. But if we go by this theory, then we can say that, yes, there will be some great souls who can attain this Nirvikalpa Samadhi and stay there longer than others. There may be some that the second that they go into that state, they jump over the other side and there's no chance of coming back. So there can also be gradation there. So this is why sometimes Sri Ramakrishna is not so definite, Ishvara Koti, Jiva Koti, that there can be some. Look at so many of the direct disciples who had Nirvikalpa Samadhi, whom Thakur did not call Ishvara Kotis, and yet could come back down and could even claim that, no, Thakur has made me an Ishvara Koti. that next time I'll come again with him. So there is some type of gradation. We'll see that later. Thakur will talk about this a little. But here he's talking just in very general terms. And we can say, of course, he's talking about himself because he did it. He didn't just go up and stay on the roof for a few minutes. He was there for 6 months. And after that, daily he could go up whenever he wanted to. Go up and down, up and down, up and down. It's unheard of. But he could do it. So he knows what he's talking about. So a man cannot live in the roof a long time. Why? The mind gets merged there. Even for Thakur, even he was a salt doll that didn't melt. But if he's in the ocean long enough, even that salt doll will melt eventually. So he would pray to the Divine Mother, Mother, don't let me lose consciousness and become one with the Brahman. Bring the mind down just to a slightly lower scale. I want to talk with the devotees. I want to enjoy their company. So he comes down again. Those who realize Brahman in Samadhi come down also and find that it is Brahman that has become the universe and its living beings. In the musical scale, there are the notes, sa re ga ma pa dha ni, but one cannot keep one's voice on ni a long time. That means remain in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, that very highest level. The ego, one cannot, yes. The ego does not vanish altogether. Okay, now another very important teaching of Sri Ramakrishna, this idea of this ego. He doesn't accept the Sankhya idea that this ego is something real. That manas, ahankara, buddhi, chitta, that these are real divisions within consciousness. He doesn't really accept that idea. And at the same time, he doesn't accept the idea that this ego is pure illusion and it can disappear. What he says is that it has no real substance to it, but it's tenacious. It may not be ultimately real, but this feeling that we have, as long as the mind is functioning, this feeling that we have doesn't leave us. Even for the God-realized soul. Because what is ego? What does Thakur mean by ego? Actually, his understanding of ego was very much like the Western idea of Freud and other psychologists. The ego is simply, who do I think I am? What comes to mind when I say I? If we understand it that way, then everyone has an ego. The Shankaracharya, when he says, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, that's his ego sense. Very strong ego. And he needs it to live in the world. But it's a very pure one. It's not mixed up with the world or identified with anything else. So he says the ego does not vanish altogether. Only in Nirvikalpa Samadhi. It's not vanished in the sense, just like the mind is not vanished. The mind is not functioning. If the mind is not functioning, the ego is not functioning. Even we read a book, we get involved in it, where's the ego at that time? Unless I'm aware that I'm reading, and then I really miss the reading part of it, the ego is not really functioning. It hasn't been transformed, it hasn't disappeared, it's just inactive at that time. So the ego does not vanish altogether. The man coming down from Samadhi perceives that it is Brahman that has become the ego. Now how does Brahman become the ego? The Brahman is consciousness. The ego is an idea that forms within consciousness. So even this, because he'll say that everything is Brahman, Brahman has become all this. So not just the ego, but the universe and all living beings. That all of these are a manifestation of Brahman. So we can say that the real jiva is not a manifestation of Brahman. Real jiva is Brahman itself. But this ego sense, it extends out of it. And through false identification, of course. But it also traced back to Brahman. There's nothing else we can trace it back to. This is the ultimate reality. This is known as Vijnana. Then he says the path of knowledge leads to truth. So again, to emphasize this idea, whenever he says it's not appropriate, he doesn't mean that it's not legitimate and authentic. It's a highly, 100% legitimate and authentic, but who is qualified for it? That's the issue. So he says the path of knowledge leads to truth. as does the path that combines knowledge and love. Okay, Gyana Mishra Bhakti. There are many people who claim that this was Thakur's real teaching. We're trying to combine them, not the way, hydrogen and oxygen, that we're combining two separate things. We're trying to see that they work hand in glove, that they help each other, that our bhakti has to be based on some higher understanding of oneness, and that our desire for oneness is enhanced when there's love there, when we can utilize the emotions. So it's not, this Gyana Mishra Bhakti is not the best term, really. We're not mixing two disparate things. We're trying to integrate them. Harmonizing is taking two things that may initially clash, and we make a little change to them so that they don't clash anymore. Integrating makes it one. So this Gyana Mishra Bhakti is really a path where we're really utilizing both equally, and each one is helping the other. It's a very strong type of path. So he says the path of knowledge leads to truth, as does the path that combines knowledge and love. The path of love too leads to the goal. So this Shuddha Bhakti, of course Thakur is always talking about that. Shuddha Bhakti doesn't mean that we don't need any Jnana Yoga behind it. What it means is that it's a pure devotion that doesn't have any selfishness to it. Because we'll find later, he'll have these big arguments with Dr. Sharkar, where he'll say that how can one love God if one doesn't know God, or at least have some understanding? And how can one have a relationship if one doesn't realize that there's oneness underlying it? So there's an importance in these Vedantic teachings, even for this path of devotion. So Shuddha Bhakti, to think that it means that we're not allowed to use the brain and try to analyze everything, I think is a mistake. I think what Thakur is really saying is a hetuki bhakti. There's no motive, selfish motive behind it. Love for love's sake. And if that love for love's sake is enhanced by a deeper understanding, then of course that's helpful for that. So the way of love is as true as the way of knowledge. All paths ultimately lead to the same truth, but as long as God keeps the feeling of ego in us, which is pretty much all the time, it is easier to follow the path of love. Okay, this will continue, this distinction, very important distinction between the Jnani and the Vijnani. The Jnani will be someone who has a traditional idea, which is still based on this idea of the dichotomy between the real and the unreal. The Vijnani has, actually Vijnana, we use it nowadays for science. It means knowledge that has distinctions within it. So it means knowledge of the one and the manifestation of the one, both together belonging to the same reality. Okay, we'll close with our chant. Om Niranjanam Nityamanandarupam Bhaktanukham Bhathur Vikramai Ishavataram Parameshamedhyam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namama. We bow our heads before Sri Ramakrishna, who is stainless, of infinite nature, whose heart melts in sympathy for his devotees, who is an embodiment of the divine and the Supreme Lord, and ever worthy of our worship. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thank you.